Hello, I'm Devora Krasnianski from Adai Ad, and I'm really excited about tonight's topic. We get a lot of questions about red flags and about controlling behaviors, and is this a problem? Is it not a problem? And so we brought in tonight from Shalom Task Force, Dr. Shana Frydman, the executive director there, to talk all about red flags and how to notice them in dating and what they are and what's actually potentially the problem if we don't address that. So, Shana, first, could you talk a minute about Shalom Task Force?
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. We love working with you, Devora and Adai Ad. Our agencies have a close relationship, and I feel like together we can have great impact. As many of you may know, Shalom Task Force is an agency that's committed to helping the Jewish community combat domestic violence and help people foster safe and healthy relationships. And we do that through 3 core services. We have our hotline chat line, which is available for people who have questions about their relationship, who are in a relationship that might feel unsafe, to just figure out what they want to do or just be able to talk to someone. And that's open around 60 or 70 hours a week. It's completely confidential. You don't have to share more than you're comfortable sharing, but it's available as a resource. And I'd say it's really an international resource because of how our community works. We have a WhatsApp. People, really reach out from all over. Our second service is a legal services program where we have attorneys that are free, that help people just learn about what the process can be if it makes sense for them to think about leaving a relationship, and they help people through Based-In and the civil court system. And then our third service, which is what makes me most hopeful, and this is really part of what we're doing here, is education in the community. So we go into schools, bisiakos, yeshivas, shoals, any kind of forum to talk about healthy relationships and talk about these important topics so people can learn more and they know they're not alone, and just be able to foster a better future for all of us. So that's an overview, and everything's on our website, and we're fairly easily accessible that way on shalomtaskforce.org.
Okay, so thank you. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this important topic of red flags, dating, what to notice, how to notice. So let's go straight into it. What are we talking about? What are we talking about when we say red flags in dating?
Right. I think that we have to roll it back a little bit and talk a little bit about what are we looking for in dating, right? Because there's a lot of things that we look for, and then what are we looking for red flags or positive and negative markers about? What are we trying to get to? So, when someone is in the parsha of dating and looking for their partner, and to really think about what are the important things that should ground that relationship. And how do we find ways of meeting someone who's compatible in that way? And compatibility is a big issue, right? It's someone who could be perfect on paper and may not be a good fit, right? And someone may not be perfect on the paper, what that means, but could be a good fit. But what are the things that you want to make sure a relationship is grounded in? And some that's very personal, right? That's something that's just kind of very particular to you. But there are some things we would suggest that should ground relationships, that of respect, that of have safety, feeling secure, feeling that you have the space to express yourselves and have a healthy disagreement, right? So to think about what makes sense for you to make sure that are the core values of what you're looking for. And then on top of that, you're looking for hashkafic similarities. You might look for, personality traits that you enjoy and fun and all that other really important stuff. But at the end, if you want to make sure that there are things that anchor, and then then when you're dating someone and you're looking into people and you're trying to meet people, to think about how those things are expressed and to be present in that dating process to see if it's a good fit, and if there are things there that we call them red flags, that are things that we should stop and be curious about to make sure that they work. And they work for you, and they work and they're safe. So to really think about those aspects of it. And what we're gonna, we're here for a bit, we're gonna talk about what those red flags are and those things, but that's really what this is about, is being able to be present enough in the dating process and to be intentional enough so that you notice things and what to do with what you notice. That's really kind of the background to this.
When you talk about safe, can you just describe that a little bit more? What are you talking about that it feels safe?
Yeah, I mean, for everybody, it feels a little bit different. But when we talk about safety, we're not only talking about physical safety, right? That you don't feel uncomfortable physically with someone, and you might feel like you're you're like nervous and scared about that person. I mean, I think that in some way is very visceral and people would recognize that, but you want to make sure you feel emotionally safe, that you have this space in a relationship to be able to express feelings and in a way that's respectful and a way that's respected. So, you know, that you're allowed to have disagreements, and anyone who's been blessed with a relationship will know that you will have disagreements. It's really part of a healthy marriage, but to be able to learn to be able to express any differences and feel safe doing so. So you don't, like when we talk about some of the, like a red flag or a negative marker is, are you walking around on eggshells, right? Are you afraid to say how you feel? Are you afraid to have a difference? And that to me is something to be curious about. And when I say curious, I don't tell people run away, stop engagement, get divorced, whatever. We don't tell people what to do, but it's a time to pause and think about, is this something that feels safe for you? And then get the support you need to think it through. So that's one way we think about safety. Is like, is there room for you to have opinions? Is there room for you to express your feelings? And do you feel physically safe? That there's something that makes you feel really uncomfortable, and to not ignore that feeling, to not ignore that.
Okay, so we described what we're looking for. So in the dating, how can we notice, or what should we be looking out for, or being very, let's go, what should we be looking out for?
Right, so I always think about it, because dating is not about passing a test, right? You don't want to be on a date, anybody doesn't want to be on a date saying, okay, am I doing good enough? Am I passing the test? But in many ways, you're getting to know each other and you're trying to test out if it feels okay and if things are okay for you. So some things you're looking for is just like a general sense, is this person a respectful person? And so the red flag side of that is disrespectful. Is he or she disrespectful to you, to the people around you? If you're out to dinner or you're out doing something, is there general respect for other people? Do they talk about their day and are disrespectful about the people they work with, the people they're in school with, the people near yeshiva with? Do they own their own behaviors in that? So you're looking at a sense of, disrespect, or respect, right? You want someone who has a value of respect. And again, if someone keeps on having a pattern of behavior that feels disrespectful, then it's time to say, what is that about, right? Because when we're talking about, the continuum here and the calls that we get when there's domestic violence in the relationship, you're talking about a pattern of behaviors that's, has power and control over another. We didn't really define that yet, but, this idea that someone has power and control of the other person. And we're not only talking about physical power and control, we're talking about a whole host of different forms. And in that is emotional abuse and verbal abuse, financial abuse, ways that person could have power and control. And so we're looking at a pattern here. So if you're seeing a pattern of disrespectful behavior, if you're seeing a pattern of behaviors that just don't seem honest, right? Where stories just don't make sense, like nothing's really adding up. Again, I would say, like, be curious about that. Like, what is that about? Like, why isn't it making sense? What is going on? How do they talk about themselves? How do they talk about what they're doing during the day? How do they talk about people they have in their lives? Are they ever feeling accountable for things that went wrong? Right? Because we all make mistakes. So if something's going wrong, are they ever accountable for it? Can they have any insight about their own behavior, or are they always the victim? Is everybody always someone else's fault? Because that to me is something that it should feel uncomfortable if they're always right and they're always the victim of others. So those are some ideas to think about. I always have my list. I don't know if that's helpful, but we can, other things we talked about, as someone who's critical of always other people, always knows better, and, then we talk about things like anger, which is an interesting thing, right? Because most of us have been angry in our lives. Like we've been angry in our lives. So again, is it a pattern? Do they recognize that they may be angry at times? What does it feel like to you? What does it feel that anger feel like? And ultimately, is there control? Is there is there a way that they're trying to control the person they're dating? Are they being possessive? So that's kind of like a framework that we look like at red flags. Some of those ideas of dishonesty and criticalness, walking on eggshells. Really kind of thinking about that way. And then ultimately, is there a possessiveness or jealousy or control that's going on? It doesn't sit right. And then what do you do with that?
I love how you said it's not only how you feel, it's also how they talk about other people.
Yes.
That's a
and how
very
they
big
treat other
indicator, because they may talk nicely to you, but you can really find more about somebody from how they talk about other people.
Right.
They
And
may
you know, if they're
know
going to talk to the
behave
waiter in a
nicely.
way that's, if they're going to talk to the waiter or someone else in a way that's really disrespectful, I would assume they'll eventually be disrespectful to people in their lives. Like people, you know, if they don't respect someone, they're not respectful. You know, and I'm not saying that they're abusive, right? We're not jumping there, but is that something that's comfortable to you to be around someone, you know, who treats other people in that way?
Right. So we're not even talking about control and abuse and power and all of
Right.
that, but I do want to define that. But right now we're just talking about, does it feel right to you? And it's
Right.
not only about how they treat you, it's really tune into how they're talking to other people.
Yeah.
About other
And how
people.
they're interacting in the world. And that's why it's important to be really present and listen, right? And not make up a narrative in your head. Oh, it must mean this, it must mean this. Ask questions, ask open-ended questions, learn about each other's days, you know, find out. And there's the part that you're looking to make sure things feel good. It's also make sure that it's compatible to you. If that person has completely, you know, has nothing in common with you, it can work for some people, but like you need to make sure it works for you. But like at the same time, if there's themes that keep on coming up, that everybody at work is mean to them, and they're, you know, like there's something to say, like what's going on, like how is that, and like what does that really mean? So to pay attention, particularly in communities, and everybody dates differently. Even in the same community, people date differently. Like we know that, right? There are people who date for a short period of time, people date a long period of time, you know, and I'm not going to, you know, tell people what to do, but to give yourself enough time that it makes sense for you. And in that time you're together, to be present, not to be at the next stage, to be where you are and pay attention, and then attend to it. You know, if something gives you, we talk a lot about uh-oh feeling. Now, not everybody has an uh-oh feeling, you know, like not everybody has, you know, maybe they've been exposed to a lot of other, you know, chaos, so they might not have the same uh-oh feeling. But if something just doesn't sit right, don't ignore it. Like, don't ignore it. Explore it, you know. And in a relationship that feels safe, you should be able to find a healthy, respectful, kind way to say, oh, I'm curious about, or I'm wondering about, or you mentioned this, you know, I want to know more about, or I'm concerned that you said. And if you can't say that, you should learn to, because when you're dating to get married, you're an adult, you need to be able to learn to do that. And it's hard to learn that. But at the same time, if you can't do it because you're afraid to say it, then that's also like a red flag, right? You don't want to not be comfortable saying it.
I also want to flip it. If you see yourself being a big blamer, maybe it's something to work on. If you see that everyone is out to get you, or that's how you end up seeing the world, and not saying that you're controlling, but not saying anything,
right.
but it's something.
You know, it's interesting because we do a ton of lectures and workshops with teens, and we've had kids come over to us and say, and they're so smart. They're like, oh, I see myself doing this with my friends, right? They're so smart. And we're like, whoa, you know? And so we added some slides about like, what do you do if you see yourself? And, you know, my gut feeling around that is, if you see yourself in these behaviors, like maybe pause dating for a little bit and get some help, because you don't want to repeat those behaviors. You want to be in a healthy relationship where you could care for someone. And if things are not going well for you, explore it. And there's room for change and growth. You know, you can't expect someone else to grow, but you could help yourself grow. And it's worth the investment in yourself as well.
And for your future family.
Yeah, and your future marriage, and your families, God willing, and yes, it's worth the investment.
And even your colleagues, and whatever it is.
To be able to interact.
So I think that's super important. So let's talk a little bit about what power and control means and how you might notice it. So you mentioned something, but let's go back to define what that means.
So, you know, I'm from Shalom Task Force. So, you know, we're known for working in domestic violence work. So domestic violence is defined by a pattern of behaviors that one person has of the other person that asserts and obtains and maintains power and control through a whole pattern of behaviors that instill a level of fear, right? So you're looking for these three things, and we were looking at one of our slides. It's a pattern, power, control, and fear. So, you know, we're not talking about a one-time fight where people are just, you know, upset with each other and probably goes back and forth. That's just life, right? Might not be nice, it might be hard, but you know, people have fights. We're talking about a dynamic within a relationship, and we see it both ways. Certainly we have more women report being victims of domestic violence. Certainly that's what we see generally and nationally, but there's certainly men who are victims as well. a relationship abuse, but you know, it's really the experience of being controlled by other partner. Now, I have never seen this. I can't say never. In my experience of probably counseling hundreds of women from our community and some men, I've never seen it go from a first date to a physical incident. Like that's just not how it looks like, right? Like I think anyone who is be physically assaulted on a first or second date, like they're not going to see that person again. There's no relationship yet, right? So it's usually kind of a small, like, you know, gradual build into more abusive, and we say abusive, controlling behaviors. So it may be in the beginning someone who's very charming and who doesn't appear as that, but then may have some of these disrespectful markers outside, but you may not see it, and that's the reality. But then these other behaviors will creep in where there's, you know, a possessiveness or isolation from your family or friends, where they'll say your family's not good enough, your friends aren't good enough, and all of a sudden your world gets smaller and smaller, and it might feel like doting for a little while, but you don't have any like personal space or personal life because it's all about him or her, right? So there's like the possessiveness or jealousy, and we see that's probably one of the things we see a lot in our frum community, because we're not together as much before we're married, right? You know, we're typically not living together. You have limited contact. So what are ways that someone can assert controls? You know, I've worked with people who, this is a way ago, but like, you know, making the other person wear beepers and they have to respond within 2 minutes. So almost on a leash, right? There's like this control. And some people are like, oh, that's so sweet. She or he really wants to know where you are, but it's really not, right? Like so the question is, what happens if you don't call back in time or you don't answer the text right away? Does that make someone angry? Is it like, are you afraid to say, I need some space? I'm busy writing a paper for school. Like, I'll talk to you in an hour. Do you have that space and safety to have personal boundaries? So those are the kind of things that you'll see in dating and engagement, right? You'll see anger, I said before, like dishonesty, like things just don't add up and you're kind of like, I'm not really sure why that makes sense, but you're afraid or you don't know how to ask the question and people aren't really telling you. And I think a lot about just this idea of having voice, right? Like, are you allowed to express your feelings? Now, you know, some colleagues like, oh, it's always good to have a good fight before you get engaged, like to have a real, you know, I don't think you should stage a fight. Like, I think that's not how we should function. But I do think that if you're getting to know someone well enough, you're going to find things that you don't agree on or don't see them the same exact way, because we are two independent people. Even if you're from similar backgrounds and have similar temperaments, you're not going to be the same. Like, you're not the same. And when you come to a place, and you should get to know each other enough, right, that you don't agree on something, how can you manage that? Now, we don't all have to manage it perfectly. It's hard to have a good fight, right? It's hard, but can you have a conversation? Do you feel safe enough? Do you know how to talk about this? Now, some of it may be that you don't know how to, but that's something to explore, right? Is it that I don't know how to say it, or am I afraid to say it? Like, what is going on there? And I would say that those are important things to think about before you make a commitment. Is what happens if it doesn't go our way, his way, my way? Like if you know, there's no seat at the restaurant, or we get lost, you're driving somewhere. Like, think about things that are natural in our lives, right? Which will happen to you 100,000 times, God willing, and your long marriage, right? Where things just don't go your way. What is the reaction, right? And how does it make you feel?
Okay, so some of our dating is rather short, and
Yes.
there isn't that, well, whatever beeper became like a cell phone. Like when I call you or when I text you, and some people don't even text or don't even share phone numbers, so they don't have that experience. So what else can we be looking out for? Because if there's less time, shorter dating.
Right. So I'm not going to be here to tell people to date longer, but I don't think people should commit until they're ready. And I think they should explore why they're not ready. Is it a regular sense of nervousness? Listen, it's a huge life change, or does something not feel right? And I hope, you know, we discussed it before. I think 2 more weeks of dating is worth it. The worst case outcome is that it's either you get engaged in a place of much more menuchas nefesh, or it's not the right relationship for the two of you. So I'm not going to, you know, some communities say it's 3 dates, 5 days, 10 dates, you get 3 months. I mean, we work with so many different communities, so everybody has their own culture around that. but we do need to find ways, even in short dating periods, to be intentional around conversation, to be intentional about really being present in the moment and not getting like, oh, it's really fun. Like, let's have real conversations about things. And I would not tell you to fabricate a fight, but I would say bring up conversations that are important. If you have an opinion, if you want to share some sort of part about an aspiration or something you're working on, right? Notice the reaction to it. You know, notice, is there an investment? Is you having your own ideas? You're allowed to have your own ideas. Relationships are healthier when people have some level of independent life and personal space, when there isn't, only the together. They are healthier when they have a little bit of difference. It keeps things interesting to people. So I would, to really think it through. Now, I can't tell you on date 1, discuss this. Date 2, by 4, you're already in. Nobody can tell you that. But to really, a lot of it is just being very intentional and taking it seriously, but having fun. But it's serious. It's serious, and to notice things and to have someone in your life to talk about it. And I can't tell you who that person's supposed to be. Listen, I'm a mental health professional, so my bias is to talk to therapists or mental health professionals. But there are other people who are really smart and wise in the world, who could help you. But you need to make sure that they're smart and wise, and they're not too nogea b'davar. And so, right, like you don't want someone who so wants to see you get engaged that they're not hearing you. And if you're expressing, oh, I have this hesitation, they're like, oh, don't worry, it's going to go away. Nobody can tell you that, and you're the one who has to have to deal with it later. So to take that seriously, who you're talking to and who's helping you.
So I think that if you do have a culture of shorter dating, then your dating has to even be more pointed, and have those difficult conversations or uncomfortable conversations. Don't skip them because the dating is so short.
Right.
You'll just have to do it sooner, or just get into it faster, but not skip it because we only have 4 dates, or we only have 6 dates, or we only have 3 weeks. So I want him to like me, or I want her to like me, so I'm not going to bring it up. So let's get these, you're shooting yourself by doing that.
And in the long term, you want someone who's going to respect you and you could grow with, and you need to make sure that there's a stage for that, and as much as you can. Now it's not foolproof. People date for years and still get into very, very unsafe relationships, and we know that, right? So there's no perfect way of doing this, but to create as best you can, right? That's all we can do, as best we can. The intention, the being present around it, and being aware, and bring your best self to it. Get the support you need around that. And if that means you need to manage some of your own stuff before or during, give yourself that.
Yeah. So this question came in. Is there a way to be able to know about this kind of behaviors or this kind of patterns from reference or from research?
Right. So references are always funny, when I hire people, I have to call references, but they're people they want me to call, right? So I always take it with a grain of salt, right? So it's the same way with Shidduch, right? If you're given references, I think we could easily assume they're people who are going to speak positively of that person, right? I mean, that's just how it works. And so I would stick to asking open-ended questions, like, how have you seen that person deal with disappointment, right? A question like that, if the person really knows them, might be able to respond. They may not be able to respond, right? Or if those kind of, how do you see this person as being responsible? Can you talk more about them in that way? Have you ever seen this person be angry? How did that play out? And to really go into the values that you're looking for, right? Beyond the the kind of checklist things. The other thing is our communities are fairly small, and if it's important to you, and references only go so far, is to find maybe people they haven't recommended, but right? Our communities are not that big. So, there's always that other person that you both know. I mean, at least I think there almost always is. So, to ask someone that they didn't put on their list. Now, I don't know how that plays out completely, but I think I would recommend that, because you're going to have people who are, the references that they're going to give you are the people they're going to most typically give very positive and not a lot of insight. But at the same time, if you're asking these questions, I don't know that anybody's going to say you actually, this person's an abusive, disrespectful person who screams and yells. Like, it's almost a blessing if someone said it to you, but I don't know that someone would say that. But if someone's saying things that make you feel like, that doesn't feel so great. So again, notice that, right? Like file it away. And if you're then seeing patterns of behavior, that kind of make you think, oh, maybe that's what they're talking about, then figure out what you want to do with that information. And again, I am not telling you, and nor would Devora or any, I'm not going to tell people what to do, right? I'm not telling you you have to go forward, not go forward. That's something the person has to own, right? But I would say pause, be curious, and really explore it to make sure it feels as good as fit as you can make it fit, you know, and if it isn't, it isn't. You know, is
So
that
what about
helpful?
that advice? Yeah, I think that was helpful. What about that advice? You can tell about their personality by the way they drive.
Where's everybody coming? I don't know who's here. If you're in New York, I don't know if that's true. I think that's a very narrow way of thinking about things. I think if you're, you know, trying to get through Manhattan and the person's a little bit assertive in their driving, I don't know that that's saying that person is controlling and angry. That might person just an assertive driver. Now, if you would say to the person, hey, listen, like I get really nauseous when someone drives that way. Do you mind slowing down? And the person's like, no, I want to drive this way. I would say that's pretty disrespectful. That's not really considerate. Like, what is that about, right? So those are two different things, right? Like, I you know, if the person's driving on a long highway and doing it in a way that makes you feel scared, right? That's very different than trying to get through Brooklyn. Now, you know, and I think you have to see how it fits, right? How does it settle on you? Is it cursing at other people, or is it a little bit of, you know, trying to get through? I mean, I don't know how particularly you want to get, but like it again, it always comes down to this idea of like looking at the pattern and how does it settle, right? Like we don't need to define everything as abusive or controlling, but we want to see how it all fits together as a larger picture. And so, but if you would say to someone, you know, I get really nauseous when someone drives this way, and the person continues to drive in a way that makes you feel sick, like to me, that's kind of, that is inconsiderate.
Especially during dating, when they're
right?
supposed to be more considerate.
Right, that's what they're doing during dating. You're kind of like, how's that going to play out, right? So, but those are the kind of things you want to look at, right? You don't want to make them to bigger deals than they are, but if something feels off about a behavior like that, then you want to look, is it part of a larger pattern? And if it's part of a larger pattern, you have to make a decision about what you want to do about that. Is it someone you want to continue getting to know more? Is it someone you don't want to continue to get to know more?
And it's also not making an inference just because someone drives like that, that means that they will. So either be curious, bring it up in a conversation and see how they respond, because maybe that's how they grew up, or she, her parents drove that way. And doesn't even know it.
Right. I mean, if you said, I really don't like how, you know, the driving really makes me feel sick, or it makes me uncomfortable, it makes me feel like I'm not comfortable with it, and they say, oh, too bad. That's one thing. They say, oh, I didn't realize that. And the next time they drive more slowly, then okay. You know, and they continue to drive more slowly, then okay. You know, so I think you know, it's a small example. And I want it to be a diagnostic example, so I don't want anybody getting off here and saying, oh, I just dated someone who just drove fast. No, you're looking at the larger pattern. Like, what is that expressing, right? What is that expressing, and how does it play out? And if you do object, and if you do express something, how does it play out for you? And then you have the right, I mean, this is not red flag. You have the right to not like someone's behavior and choose not to get to know them better because of it. You do, you know, that is what dating is, you know. You need to want to be with that person. So, and you're allowed to say that, you know, you're allowed to not want to be with someone.
Totally. Okay, let's talk a little bit about personality disorders.
Yeah. So there's a lot of personality disorders. So people often say, oh, it's narcissism, abuse, and as someone is borderline, what's that like to live with? And, you know, there's all these things. And I don't know that going through the diagnostic criteria for each type of personality disorder is helpful. Personality disorders can be very difficult to live with. And again, it's something that you have to look at and be very real with yourself and real with how it's coming out to see if it's something you want to live with. Because personality disorders are very hard to change. Now, that's another conversation about mental health issues, and that's not our topic today. But in some way, some mental health issues are much easier to live with because they're treatable. We know there's good treatment for it. There's maintenance of those mental health issues. And if someone has personal insight, takes a lot of responsibility, they really can live very full lives and be wonderful partners with depression, with anxiety, that's the reality, right? Like if you are able to own it and you're able to take responsibility for mental health issues, very often people are able to be wonderful partners. Narcissism, borderline, narcissism is probably the hardest, I would say, but you really need to iron out to see, because even if it's not abusive by the textbook definitions, I don't know that it really matters. If it doesn't feel good to be with, then you may not want to be with that person. And I don't know that you have to say no because the person's abusive. You're allowed to not want to continue something because it's not a good fit. You're looking for good fits for you. And so, and those are tough. They're tough places to be. And if someone see themselves have those tendencies, I'd say that they should really invest in themselves to be able to manage relationships differently and have insight around that, so that they could have healthy, meaningful, mutually meaningful relationships with people and have a family in a way that's healthy and safe for everybody.
What might narcissism look like? I mean, they're usually very charming,
right? Charming,
charismatic.
right,
But just because someone is charming and charismatic doesn't mean they're the narcissist. So I understand.
No, it doesn't. There are a lot of charming, charismatic people who are not. We know a lot of them. All about them. Very little insight, very little responsibility towards other people. I mean, a lot of it does look like abuse. So I don't know that it's particularly helpful to diagnose it, but if the patterns, someone just wrote this and they're right. Narcissists often start with love bombing. There's like an intensity, because honestly, it's about them and what they want. And if I really like you, I like you, and that could feel really, really good. At the same time, it needs to feel good to both people. It needs to be able to be sustained. So, you want to look and see what it feels like to you, if there's patterns around that. And if it's something that you could live with and not create some sort of other narrative. And I think that a lot of times there is a lot of pressure around dating, getting married. I think we have to acknowledge that dynamic. A lot of fear in not finding someone. And so if something feels good or good enough, we try to make it fit. And sometimes that makes sense, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. And we want to be open, but we don't want to be open in a way that puts our personal safety or our respect on the line.
Use the word love bomb. If you just describe that a little bit more for those who don't know what that is.
The person who wrote that is the word love bomb. I would say it's more like the intensity, like I like you, I love you, you're perfect, like, and it becomes almost like this level of enmeshment, and it's very intense, like I love you fast, and we see sometimes that in abusive relationships. I'll say, like in the beginning, it can feel very overwhelmingly like romantic, even in our very frum communities. Like there's gestures and there's like this extreme to it, which could be very nice, and I'm not saying that can't work. I'm saying we have to look at it, right? And see, where is it sustained? Is there room for real conversation and real relationship building? And to really explore that. But ultimately, when you're dating, I don't know that it matters what it is. If it's not a good fit and it doesn't feel safe to you, and you don't have a voice, and you don't feel safe, and you don't feel respected, and you really need to explore if it makes sense to move forward.
It doesn't have to be control issues. If it doesn't feel right to you, we don't have to define what it is. If it really just feels really off.
It feels off, right? Then, and if you're finding yourself that everything feels off, so maybe you need to take a pause and figure out if if you need to look at dating differently. But you just need to know that it's and we know it in theory that it is a life commitment. But we need to make sure that things that you see, that you don't ignore. You don't want to ignore things.
Similarly, someone once mentioned that if she spends a lot of money on the date, that's a red flag. What are your thoughts to that? like $500.
I
if they
never
have to
even
write.
thought about that. Let me try to think about it right here. I never thought about it. I'm not sure what it's trying to communicate, so I really don't know. And there's so many different, what does that mean? Is the person exceptionally wealthy and it's no big deal to have a $500 dinner? Or is it like an extreme stretch for them and this is their gesture and they're trying to impress them? I don't know what that really,
So not to read into it, not to read into it.
I'm trying to wonder what it communicates. Like for some people, that's not a big deal. There are people that really, they're very wealthy and like eating very fancy meals is, and eating the dinners like that is just part of what they like doing. If that's not comfortable for you and it's not part of a culture you want to be involved in, and you're not part of that world and you don't want to enter that world, then that's something to look at. But at the same time, are they doing it to impress you? And it's at almost like not a responsible thing to do. It's also something to look for. But I don't know that those kind of things are helpful in snapshot. I think it's a larger picture. I'm not sure about that. I have never thought about it.
What I'm trying to point out is that there are these, if they do this, then it must mean that. And it really isn't always like that. Like we said with the driving, or now we have with the spending a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. Going back to, I think your first word was curious, always being curious.
I always use that word because I think that it's really important to take that stance. In life, I think it's important to take that stance. It makes life much more interesting. But in the sense of we don't know what things mean, but don't ignore it until you figure it out. If you're interested in this relationship, then why is he or she spending $500 on a date? Like, why is that? And it may be that it's a gesture to show they care. Okay, that's very sweet. Now, if it's happening every night, then that's another, why is that happening? Why is that necessary? But to really just take a stance of okay, what's going on? And then not to ignore. So we can't, are there things that automatically think that they're abusive? I don't know. If someone physically hurts someone, I would say I wouldn't read much into it. I'd say this is not a person you want to be around. If the person pushes a personal boundary in a way that's really aggressive. To me, I would think I wouldn't be curious for too long. I would say, I don't know, what that's about. There are certain things, but even if someone expresses annoyance at something, is it because they had a hard day and they're able to own that they shouldn't have been so snappy? Or are they always annoyed at people? And those are different things, but don't ignore it. Figure out what's going on, and if it's a good fit for you. So there are, I can't think of that many things that automatically say this, but crossing personal boundaries, being physically aggressive, some level of disrespect, and how that plays out. But again, be in a place of learning about each other, and looking at the larger picture.
And ask the questions. If you can feel comfortable enough to ask the questions. And I know that some people don't want to ruin the possibility of the shidduch, so they don't want to bring certain things up. But I think that it's really not to their benefit to get them.
When's it going to come up?
They don't know.
Right, and then it will come up. Right, it's going to come up. Not now. Then now I'll say that it's hard to know how to have these conversations. It's not natural for any of us. I don't think. To stop in the middle of a thing and say, I'm curious about, or I'm wondering about that. Or you said this last time and I've been reflecting on. That's not something that any of us do naturally. And I'd say that's where it's important to get either a good therapist or a good mashpia or someone in your life who's wise. And in my world, we role play, right? We call it that, right? We actually I will work with clients to help them learn the words to do that, because we don't know how. It's not natural for us to do that, and that's okay. It's okay that we don't know how to do that perfectly, but to learn some skills, and those are relationship skills, and those skills will serve you through your life. So how do you do that?
So I think dating is also an opportunity to experience the other person in having some sort of difficult conversation. I almost feel like if you haven't had a difficult conversation, then how do you know that you could have a difficult conversation? You know that you could have this conflict, difference of opinion, difference of schedule, something, so that you can actually work something out together. Kind of feel how whoever you're married to, you'll have to be making lots of decisions together. Difference of perspective, difference of opinions. So get a little feel for how it would work with this person.
Right. And we're talking right now to a group, an audience that's, I imagine most of you are dating right now. But when we talk to teens, we even talk about learning to do this in your friendships, right? Like when you, and think back to your life, when your closer friends, like you're able to, and you want to be able to have some level of conflict and resolution in a way that's positive and helpful. And you usually become closer when you're able to do that, right? When you could, and practice it, not like intentionally, I'm gonna have a fight with you right now, or one of your friends, or I'm gonna disagree with you. But if someone's sharing something and you have a different opinion, what is it like for you just to share a different opinion? And can you say it in a way that other people could hear it, but you're still having a voice? Because it's just really important to be able to have a voice in relationship. And that's what we see when we see on the other end and the other side, we work with people who are in marriages that are controlling and abusive. What they really talk about is, one client who called it screaming in silence. And to me, that was like, so like poignant, right? Like screaming in silence of like, she's like, I couldn't even say it. Nobody would listen to me. I couldn't even say out loud what was going on. I could never express my feelings. I could never express my opinion, and was completely controlled in all ways, from the physical to the verbal to the sexual to the financial, the whole, she really had a very abusive situation, but it felt like she was screaming in silence. She had no voice. And I think it's important, as we raise our children, to them to learn how to have voices in a respectful, appropriate way, to have opinions, to have, and to know that they're entitled to have, preferences and things in life. They're allowed to want things and like things and not like things, because it's part of connecting, and it's part of connecting healthfully.
So in bringing something up that's difficult, either you'll come closer because with that curiosity.
Yeah,
they express why they felt that way or something about it, or you'll discover that it's not for you, but not bringing it up and kind of hoping it's not there doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
You can't hope for 50, 70 years. It just
it doesn't go away for 50 or 70 years. And that's what we want, right? We want to be in the 50, 70 year marriages. So no, it doesn't go away. And you need to, and yes, and there are times when you have fights or disagreements that you don't feel closer, but you move through them anyway. But when you're dating someone, if you can't have any respectful way of having a disagreement or sharing your opinion, then you really need to think twice if it's someone you want to keep on building something with. And some of it might become from immaturity. We could be immature, but then we have to work on ourselves to learn to do it better. That's what we keep on doing.
And so what I also like is when people have the situation that they planned this date and then it didn't work out and they get all flustered, and like, you can actually get to see each other better, how we deal. Okay, so that place is closed, or there's no seats left in the restaurant. Right. Now let's figure something out together. It's like, wow, now we can get to actually
we can plan, and you can even do a date like that. Plan a date together. Like plan a date together. That doesn't have to, like, how do you talk about what you enjoy doing? It's fairly low, stakes. It's not like, you're not buying your house. It's not your children's education decisions. There are a lot of decisions to come, God willing, right? So like, how do you plan something together? How do you have a conversation about some decision together? And that will inform how you're able to work together. And you could grow in that. But if you feel that's where you're looking for some of those red flags, if you feel disrespected, disregarded, that your boundaries aren't being respected, you aren't allowed to express it or embarrassed to express it, then you really need to think more about if it makes sense.
But not even that, separate from that, which I know we started talking about red flags, but the idea of having those kinds of conversations, just to see that you can have these kind of conversations, that your styles jive, that it's not even, let's say, a major red flag of disrespect, but that you could have these conversations, because very soon after marriage starts, you will have differences of opinions. Very fast.
Right. And so that's important. I mean, and right, it's not only for red flags, but it's also see, are you able to do that? And like, can you laugh about it if you can't at times? And are you able to find some place of connection around those experiences together?
And I know that some people like to have the shotgun to have the difficult conversations or to pass the difficult information. And I think that's a missed opportunity. Yeah. I know we try to make it as emotionally safe as possible, so we don't want anyone to get hurt by hurt feeling, but we're also taking away the opportunity to have those conversations. Even sometimes as something as simple as scheduling the next date, sometimes the shadchanim take that role. And I think that's interesting for them to see how they can work out something as simple as a Tuesday doesn't work for me. Oh, so we're just Thursday afternoon. Not like go through beside that. I think it saves the shotgun's time.
Right.
But
so I'm not enrolled to dictate how communities should manage shidduchim. Like I don't want to impose my thoughts about that, but I do. When you say that, it really resonates with me because we might use the words of girls and boys, but really they're women and men. People who are getting married are women and men. We're adults. If you're entering a marriage, you're an adult, and to be able to schedule something together or express to each other how you're feeling about a relationship, maybe not after the first or second date, whatever your number is. And again, that's really very community specific and I don't want to impose on that, but if you can express how you're feeling about someone or what you're struggling with at all, or even making like, when's our next date? And then how is that going to jump into a commitment of a marriage? And that's a really big jump and how you're going to really see how that could work. So when you say that, I tend to agree how you're expressing it. Like it feels like a missed opportunity to me as well, where we could grow through that. And if this isn't the right one, then you've learned these skills for when you do meet the right person. And we're part of each other's journey in that way.
Someone once expressed to me that when she was talking to the shotgun kept cleaning up the person's
interesting.
And so not bringing out the person's expression, they're maybe bringing out the end result,
right?
But they're not bringing out how they got the process of how upset he was before until the shotgun calmed him down, and it was a missed opportunity for him to see actually how. And so,
it's a missed opportunity for connection, even, right? It's a missed opportunity to like see what's going on, but it's also a missed opportunity for connection because it's in those moments that we grow with someone, right? It's not always the end game; it's the process, right? And that's what life is going to look like, right? That's what marriage is. It's not the final product. It's every step of the way, even those really difficult and hard steps of the way. So. It does feel like a missed opportunity. So if you could find those opportunities within whatever your community, I'm not, I don't want to, dictate, but I would say if there are opportunities within what can happen to take those opportunities with each other.
So I think that the idea of let's plan the next date together.
Yeah.
Okay, so we both agreed through the shotgun, not through the shotgun, that we'll have this next date. But now can we plan the date, or we just come in with like, okay, so where do we want to go? Which is typical in your marriage X amount of years, and you say, okay, finally we'll have a date night.
And then we know where
we're
to go.
Going. Right. And so we can do that even earlier, especially when you don't know, she doesn't know the other one's preferences. So now
you can learn about them. And it also has a way of expressing what your schedule even looks like, right? Like if you're in school and the person's like, I want to go Tuesday night and you have a big exam on Wednesday, to be able to say, I have this really big exam on Wednesday, I need to study. And for that person to say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Or no, can't you study on their time? And that's something to look at. Like, are they respectful of a goal of yours? Like those are the places where you're able to have like real tochen, right? There's real content there of like what's going on, how do they process the world, what's going on in their lives, and it gives insight into each other, and then there's room for greater connection, which is what we hope for, right? We are hoping for greater and healthier connection for people.
So I know typical dates are sitting in a lounge talking,
right?
Do you feel like you can, and I think there's a lot to be said about sharing of information. I think that's great. Is there any other ways to actually get to experience someone, like if they were to go someplace, and what might a someplace be? That's what I'm asking you.
I mean, this is all very community specific, right? So everybody has their, right? So some people eat out, some people don't. Some people are comfortable spending a Shabbos together before they engage. A lot of people do not feel comfortable with that. So, some people are comfortable introducing people to friends. A lot of people are not. It really is like, it's so community specific, but how can you get to know the person? Do people play games together? You created a great game. This card, I actually have it right over there. I
don't have mine next to me, but it's called Convos, which is actually conversation starters. Conversation starters, and it's really get some really good conversation starters.
Yeah, get some really good conversations. I've used it. I think it's great. Like how do you do that? And then it really also matters. I mean, listen, and people have different boundaries and sensitivities, but can you do something you enjoy together? Do you enjoy going to parks? Like, can you do something like that? Are there museums? Like, it's a little bit more than a lounge. You can notice things about each other. You're seeing people interact with people other than the person who brings over the Diet Coke. I mean, that's what it was in my day. Like, you don't really get to know someone if they're bringing over Diet Coke and you see no one else but each other for 3 hours. But if you're walking through a museum and you're interacting with other people and you're noticing things together and you're learning about each other's, like, oh, I really do like modern art, right? This makes no sense to me, and why is that considered art, right? That's an interesting conversation. You're getting to know each other. It's also fun. and you should
Barnes
have
and
fun.
Noble.
Barnes and Nobles, like come over with your your favorite 3 books and like, or something
The
that
sections you
and
want to
talk
stand
about
in front of: travel, self-help, art.
Right. And like, it gives it a little bit more, again, there's no foolproof way, but how can you try to simulate some sort of more like, what is real? Like, how do you deal with the person in the cash register? And how do you deal with the parking situation? And if you're on and off the subway, for us New Yorkers here, what is that like? And, how do you deal with, the people on the subway, like what is going on there? And, and not to then diagnostically say anything, but then take it in. It's part of a larger picture as you get to know the person and hopefully get to like the person, or if it's not the right person, to get to know that too.
And even though I think that every couple is somewhat individual. So if you really feel that you would like to get her to see somebody else, like to see in your family, not necessarily a whole Shabbos, but maybe Matzah Shabbos, not even for that long, it's very specific. If you feel there's a real need, even if it's not necessarily community, what's generally happening in your community, if you really feel there's a need for it, then see how you can work it out. Right. If you really want to. But it's something that and there is some value, a lot of value, but let's say some value in seeing how they interact with people and having other people's perspectives, because you can see how they interact with the waiter or with the people in the museum, but they're not going to give you perspective.
Right. And that's the thing, is like who and how, and again, the community norms, whatever that those are, and we should be respectful to them, are there select people in your life who can meet this person and have a meaningful enough interaction, not just a, Shalom Aleichem, like a meaningful interaction to give you some feedback, and not people who
especially
are naysayers.
If you're concerned, especially if you're
absolutely, if you're especially concerned. And I'm not into, I have one colleague always talks about, you don't need a committee. You don't want like 15 people, but can you find those 2 or 3 people who are not going to be so pushing you to get engaged or pushing you not to get engaged, who really are like, okay, like, let me also be present and see what you're talking about and see if it's something that, that is a concern or isn't a concern. But again, if someone else tells you it isn't concern and you still think it's concern, you're the one at the end of the day who's going to have to close the door and be with that person. So you're going to have to trust your gut. It has to be your process, because whatever everybody else says to you, you're still the adult here who has to live with that decision. And
day in, day out. And I mean, hopefully we'll all work out, and hope maybe they're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your gut spend more time there. Your gut was in the situation.
Right.
And sometimes maybe what I've seen, sometimes people the first time they express it, they weren't able to express it fully. So what they said may sound like it's not a big deal, but it still doesn't resonate. But the not a big deal doesn't resonate. And so when they really delve into it a little bit more, they can see that they weren't really expressing themselves, and that's why it didn't sound like it was a big deal.
Right. And that's where we don't want to fill in. We don't want to fill in the story. You need to get the story. If someone's saying this doesn't feel good, it doesn't make sense, then figure out the details, because details do matter. Right. It really does come down to that. So like, don't let yourself create some sort of excuse. Like, you want to really figure out what that is, and then make some decisions from real information and from real feeling.
I know that you said that you get phone calls from people during dating also. It's not only from after marriage.
Oh yeah, and we love those phone calls. We go into a lot of high schools, both boys and girls schools. And I call them boys and girls because they are teens. And to talk about components of dating and healthy relationships. And then 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 years later, they'll call our hotline saying, "Listen, I remember this lady came in and talked about this, and this isn't sitting right." And then having conversation, even anonymous, confidential conversation. It's not therapy, but at least someone who's not really in it to just reflect back what you're saying and to be your mirror, because sometimes we can't even we can't do it for ourselves. Right? We're emotional, we're in it, we want to be emotional, we want to be in it, we want to be excited, right? We want those feelings. But if something isn't feeling right, to make that phone call to someone, to Shalom Task Force, to where you're comfortable calling, you to say, this is what's going on, and have someone reflect it back to you, to recognize what's going on. And yes, and hopefully everybody does find someone to have a long, productive, meaningful, and safe relationship for those 50 and 70 years. That's what we all want for people.
Right. And I think that it is important to actually to speak with somebody. Like I know it's a very private, but just to hear yourself express how you're feeling, just in general, even if everything is moving smoothly, just it's a big decision to make for yourself.
Yes.
By yourself.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's always this very hard balance. And I think it's true about marriage as well, about like respecting the sanctity and privacy of the dating and of marriage, but also making sure you have access to enough support. And it is a very hard balance. But to be able to find that, you have to strike it, because it is very lonely, even in very good marriages, if you can't talk to anyone ever. And that's, you need to find people, I think Devora and I are probably on the same page, where it probably want to be with someone who's trained, but people who could help support you make good decisions and to move in the right direction and to give you a good, healthy perspective. Someone asked who teens to call. We have teens call us and WhatsApp us all the time. So if that's helpful, and if we're not appropriate, we could help refer them to other agencies that may be more teen oriented, but we actually have youth call us all the time. So mostly text. The kids like to text us.
So that's why you got
WhatsApp. That's why you opened it. Yeah, they love texting WhatsApp, WhatsApping us. But yes, it is available to youth as well.
Let's go back to what we were saying before that. For some people, talking to their parents, they don't want to say it all, or the parents may be a little like, well, we have found, not too many, but we have found that some parents just want this over with for their kids or for themselves for whatever reason.
It's a really hard time. It is hard. It's stressful. Let's acknowledge it. It's hard. It's stressful. It's, you don't want to, you don't want to be part of whatever that crisis people talk about is, so the
idea to get someone objective, not someone so close, because of, like I said, sometimes the parents, it's something that they had in their parents' marriage that they can't say, mom, dad, the dad did that, so like they don't want to bring it up. So then they should really have somebody else to talk to.
Yeah,
and parents should welcome that their kids are talking to somebody else.
Absolutely, because as much as it feels stressful to parents want their children to be in healthy relationships. Right? Like they want them to get married, but even more get married, they want them to get married to the right person and have a healthy and safe relationship. And so to find those people, and gratefully our community does have resources to offer people. So yeah.
So
question. Share the number. I am the worth. I wrote it down because I've worked here for years and I always forget it. 888-883-2323. So 888-883-2323. That is both our phone number, our text, and our WhatsApp line. We close around 10 o'clock most nights, but you just look on our website for our, if we're not there, you'll find out when we are. But yeah, and you can always look on our website. There's lots of different resources available to people on the website. You can also do live chat through the website. So like now. So
yeah, we also have at our Adai Ad website lots of resources about dating and red flags, and we have actually the end the abuse. We did a lot of work on the end the abuse, so there's some videos there. So get a good sense of what's going on. If anyone has any questions about dating, you can reach out to us at Adai Ad's website, adaiad.org. That's all A's, ADAIAD.org. And Shana, you want to just give your website one more time?
ShalomTaskForce.org, www.shalomtaskforce.org. You'll have to reach any of us there as well.
All right. So
thank you
so much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So much, once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.